It was a really busy week at the White House. We saw this flurry of executive orders and policy updates on pretty much everything, from your grocery bill all the way to the future of AI. Now, on the surface, they might seem totally disconnected, but today, we're going to decode these announcements and show you how they reveal a surprisingly coherent strategy.
I mean, it was a total blitz. In just a few days, you've got executive orders, economic updates, new policy initiatives, all coming out at once. And these actions, they seem to cover a lot of ground, right? From the price of food to artificial intelligence. But are they really as disconnected as they look?
For starters, one of the biggest executive orders is aimed at what the administration calls price fixing in the American food supply chain. They're basically suggesting that some anti-competitive stuff is happening that's driving up your costs.
Then you have another one that deals with the future of technology, and it's raising concerns about the potential for what one White House fact sheet actually calls woke AI.
And all this is happening while the administration is putting out some really bold economic messaging, celebrating what it's labeled the largest tax cuts in American history. We're definitely going to dig into the details of who really benefits from those in just a bit.
So you gotta ask, right? What's the common thread here? Is there a grand plan? In this explainer, we're going to connect the dots. We'll break down the week's announcements into 3 key areas, and we're going to start with the administration's story about the economy.
All right, first up, the economy. Based on a bunch of articles and speeches from this week, the White House is painting a very specific picture of economic recovery and progress.
Okay, so what's really interesting here is the framing. The administration is presenting its economic performance as a complete reversal of the previous term. As you can see from their own data, key things like inflation and gas prices are shown trending down, while real wages are supposedly on the rise. Now, that's a powerful story, for sure. But it's also worth pointing out that most economists would tell you these trends are usually caused by all sorts of global factors, not just the policies of one administration.
And this message wasn't just in some dry report. It was the absolute centerpiece of a rally in Pennsylvania. In his speech, the president directly tied these economic numbers to his administration's policies, flat out declaring that America is back.
And to back up that economic story, the administration is pointing a finger at trade. According to one of their articles, the U.S. trade deficit has dropped by over 35% compared to last year. They say this sharp decline is a direct result of their America First trade agenda and using tariffs. Of course, many economists would argue that trade deficits are influenced by a whole bunch of other things, like consumer demand and currency rates.
Okay, so that's the story they're telling. But how does that turn into actual policy? Well, the first major executive action of the week hits pretty close to home for a lot of Americans: the rising cost of food.
So the problem they're identifying here is price fixing. The executive order says this kind of anti-competitive behavior threatens the food supply. And it points out that some companies have already settled civil lawsuits over this very practice. It also makes a special point to mention concern about the role of foreign-controlled corporations.
And here's the solution they're putting on the table. It's a classic two-pronged federal attack, creating brand new, dedicated task forces inside both the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission. And their job? To investigate, prosecute, and fix any anti-competitive behavior they can find.
All right, next up, we're moving from the grocery aisle over to Wall Street. A second executive order this week takes aim at some very influential firms that advise large investors.
The target here is a specific kind of firm called a proxy advisor. Now, as the White House documents explain, these firms advise the big players, pension funds, mutual funds, on how to vote their shares in big corporate decisions. According to the executive order, this gives them enormous influence over America's biggest companies.
And get this, a fact sheet from the White House really drives this point home. It says that just 2 foreign-owned firms, Institutional Shareholder Services and Glass Lewis, control over 90% of the entire proxy advisor market. That's a huge concentration of power.
So the executive order gets a bunch of federal agencies to take action. The SEC has to review its rules, especially those related to environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI initiatives, which the administration has called radical politically motivated agendas. The FTC is going to investigate for anti-competitive practices, and the Department of Labor will review rules for retirement plans to make sure they're prioritizing financial returns for workers.
And for the third major action of the week, we're shifting gears to tech, with an executive order designed to shape the future of artificial intelligence right here in the United States.
The administration is basically framing this as a choice. The problem, as they see it, is this messy patchwork of 50 different state-level regulations, which they argue just creates confusion and holds back innovation. The solution they're proposing? To create one single, minimally burdensome national standard,
A fact sheet from the White House gives us a pretty direct quote from the president, and it really gets to the heart of their concerns. It highlights this fear that individual state laws could actually embed ideology into AI models and, again, hammers home that call for one federal standard.
So how are they planning to make this single standard happen? Well, here's the playbook. The order creates a new litigation task force at the Department of Justice to challenge state AI laws. It also tells agencies to potentially withhold federal broadband funding from states that have what it calls onerous AI laws. And it calls for creating a federal law that would just override any conflicting state laws. It's a multi-pronged approach using both legal and financial muscle.
Okay, so let's pull back for a second. We've looked at the economic messaging and these 3 huge executive orders. So what's the big picture? When you put all the pieces from the week together, a really clear philosophy of how to govern starts to take shape.
You know, across all the week's announcements, you see these themes pop up again and again. There's a really strong emphasis on deregulation to drive economic growth. There's a clear strategy of using federal power to overrule state-level regulations. We saw that with AI Order. The America First idea is central to trade policy, and there's a direct challenge to corporate ESG and DEI initiatives. And finally, a recurring theme you hear from the president this week is this idea of peace through strength.
And all of this leaves us with one really big, thought-provoking question. The actions this week, especially on AI policy, are a major assertion of federal power over the states. And this isn't just some abstract legal debate. It has real effects on how policies that affect our daily lives get made. So it leaves us with a crucial question to think about. How might this approach reshape that long-standing balance of power between Washington and the states? And what is that going to mean for all of us in the years to come?